The morning fog rolled across the San Diego harbor like a gray blanket, muffling the sounds of the busy naval base. Admiral Marcus Steele stood on the deck of the USS Defiance, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he surveyed the activity below. At 52, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen combat in 3 different theaters and earned every ribbon on his chest through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. His salt-in, pepper beard was trimmed with military precision, and his deep blue eyes held the kind of intensity that came from making life-or-death decisions under pressure. The other sailors on deck gave him a respectful berth, not just because of his rank, but because of the legend that surrounded him. Marcus Steele wasn't just any admiral. He was a former Navy SEAL who had risen through the ranks on merit alone. 26 years ago, he had been Petty Officer Steele, fresh out of BUD/S training, and hungry to prove himself. Now, he commanded the respect of thousands of men and women under his command. But this morning, something felt different. There was a tension in the air that had nothing to do with the upcoming naval exercises. His aide, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, approached with the day's briefing folder. "Admiral, your 0900 meeting with the Pentagon liaisons has been moved to the conference room. There's also been a request from someone claiming to be with the Department of Justice. They want to schedule a courtesy visit." Marcus took the folder without looking away from the harbor. "Department of Justice? What do they want with naval operations?" "They didn't specify, sir. Just said it was routine interagency cooperation. The contact is an Agent Sarah Chun." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but then again he dealt with dozens of federal agents and bureaucrats every month. Part of his job as a senior admiral was navigating the complex web of military and civilian oversight. He nodded dismissively. "Schedule it for next week. Today's packed." As Rodriguez walked away, Marcus couldn't shake a nagging feeling. In his experience, there was no such thing as routine when it came to the FBI or DOJ, but he had more pressing concerns. The 7th Fleet was conducting joint exercises with Allied forces, and the logistics alone were a nightmare. 3 hours later, Marcus was deep in discussion with his staff about submarine deployment patterns when his secretary knocked on the conference room door. "Admiral, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who says she has an appointment." Marcus glanced at his watch. His calendar was clear until 1400 hours. "I don't have any appointments scheduled. She says she's Agent Chun from the Department of Justice. She insisted it was important." Marcus exchanged glances with his chief of staff, Captain Williams. They had been discussing classified operational details, but if this was legitimate federal business, he couldn't simply turn her away. "All right, give me 5 minutes to wrap this up, then send her in." The room cleared except for Captain Williams, who stayed behind to help organize the classified documents. Marcus straightened his uniform and checked his reflection in the conference room window. First impressions mattered, especially when dealing with federal agents who were always looking for something to criticize about military operations. The door opened, and his secretary stepped aside to let the visitor enter. Marcus looked up, expecting to see another middle-aged bureaucrat in a conservative pantsuit. Instead, he found himself looking at a young Asian-American woman who couldn't have been more than 30. She was dressed professionally, but simply dark slacks, white blouse, and a lightweight blazer that concealed what Marcus's trained eye recognized as a shoulder holster. She was attractive in an understated way, with intelligent dark eyes and long black hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. But what struck Marcus most was her posture. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that usually came with experience and training. Still, she looked so young that his first instinct was to assume she was someone's assistant or intern. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, remaining seated behind the conference table. The woman stepped forward and extended her hand. "Agent Sarah Chun, FBI. Thank you for seeing me on short notice, Admiral." Marcus stood and shook her hand, noting her firm grip. "I wasn't aware we had an appointment, Agent Chun, and I have to say, you're not quite what I was expecting." A slight smile played at the corners of Sarah's mouth. "I get that a lot. I hope you don't mind the informality, but I was hoping we could have a brief conversation about some operational matters that might be of mutual interest." Marcus gestured to one of the chairs across from him. "Please have a seat. Though I should mention that my schedule is pretty tight today." "What kind of operational matters are we talking about?" Sarah sat down and pulled a small notebook from her blazer pocket. "I'm with the Financial Crimes Unit, Admiral. We're conducting a broad review of military contracting procedures, particularly around procurement and vendor relationships. Nothing specific to your command, of course, just part of a larger initiative to ensure compliance with federal regulations. The explanation sounded reasonable enough, but something about the woman's manner put Marcus on edge. She was too calm, too composed for someone who was supposedly just conducting routine interviews. And there was something in her eyes, a sharpness that suggested she was evaluating every word he said. "I see," Marcus said carefully. "Well, Agent Shun, I'm sure you understand that procurement decisions at this level involve a lot of moving parts. What specific areas are you interested in?" Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying him with those intelligent eyes. "Let's start with something simple. How long have you been in your current position?" 18 months, Marcus replied. "I was promoted from Rear Admiral and given command of the Pacific Surface Forces. And before that, I commanded Destroyer Squadron 15 out of Yokosuka. Before that, I was Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Information Warfare." Sarah made a note in her notebook. "Impressive career progression. I imagine it's quite different from your days as an enlisted SEAL." Marcus felt a flicker of surprise. Most people didn't know about his enlisted background. It wasn't something that typically came up in official biographies. "You've done your homework, Agent Shun." "It's my job," she said simply. 26 years of service, starting as an E3 and working your way up to 08. That's remarkable. Not many people make that kind of jump. There was something in her tone that Marcus didn't like. Not quite accusatory, but probing in a way that suggested this wasn't as routine as she claimed. "Hard work and dedication," he said. "Plus a little luck along the way. And some high-profile operations," Sarah added. "Operation Neptune's Resolve in the Persian Gulf. The hostage rescue in Somalia. The classified mission in Syria that earned you the Navy Cross." Now Marcus was definitely on alert. The Syria operation was still classified, and the details weren't in any public record. "Agent Shun, I have to ask, what does my service record have to do with federal procurement regulations?" Sarah closed her notebook and met his eyes directly. "Admiral, I think we both know that financial crimes investigations often uncover other irregularities. I'm not here to waste your time or mine. I'm here because certain patterns have emerged that warrant a closer look." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on the command authority that had carried him through decades of military service. "Agent Shun, if you have specific allegations or concerns, I suggest you present them clearly. Otherwise, I have a fleet to run." "Fair enough," Sarah said, reopening her notebook. "Let's talk about Titan Maritime Solutions." Marcus felt his stomach tighten, but his expression remained neutral. Titan Maritime was a defense contractor that had won several lucrative Navy contracts over the past year. They provided specialized equipment and services for submarine operations, and their work had been exemplary. What about them? They've received over $40 million in contract from the Navy in the past 18 months. Almost all of those contracts were approved or recommended by officers under your command. "They're a qualified vendor," Marcus said. "Their work meets our specifications, and their pricing is competitive." Competitive, yes, but their bid submissions always seem to come in just slightly under their nearest competitors, almost as if they had inside information about what the other companies were proposing. Marcus kept his expression carefully neutral, but his mind was racing. This was definitely not a routine compliance check. "Agent Shun, are you suggesting there's been some kind of impropriety in the contracting process?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Admiral. I am investigating, and part of that investigation involves understanding the relationships between key decision-makers and the companies that benefit from those decisions." Sarah pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. "This is a preliminary analysis of contracts awarded to Titan Maritime. Notice anything interesting about the timeline?" Marcus opened the folder and scanned the documents. His heart sank as he saw the pattern laid out in black and white. Every major contract award to Titan had come within weeks of his taking on a new position or responsibility. It was circumstantial, but it painted a picture that would be hard to explain away. "This is very interesting reading," Sarah continued. "But what really caught my attention was this." She pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table. It showed Marcus in civilian clothes, shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit outside what appeared to be an upscale restaurant. The timestamp showed it was taken 6 months ago. "That's James Morrison, CEO of Titan Maritime Solutions," Sarah explained. The photo was taken the day before Titan submitted their bid for the submarine maintenance contract. The same contract that was awarded to them despite their bid being nearly 10% higher than the closest competitor. Marcus stared at the photograph, his mind scrambling for an explanation. He remembered the dinner. Morrison had approached him at a Navy-sponsored charity event and suggested they continue their conversation over a meal. It had seemed innocent enough at the time, but he realized how it must look to an outside observer. "Agent Chun," he said slowly, "I can understand how this might appear suspicious, but I can assure you that everything I've done has been in the best interests of the Navy and the American people." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious but not hostile. "Admiral, I'm not here to destroy your career or embarrass the Navy. I'm here to get to the truth. If there's an innocent explanation for these patterns, I need to hear it. But if there's something more going on, it's going to come out eventually. It always does." Marcus looked into her eyes and saw something unexpected, not the cold calculation of an ambitious investigator, but genuine concern. It was almost as if she was giving him a chance to explain himself before things went too far. "What exactly are you asking me?" he said finally. "I'm asking for your cooperation," Sarah replied. "I'm asking you to help me understand what's been happening. And I'm asking you to be completely honest with me, because the alternative is much worse for everyone involved." Marcus sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of 26 years of service pressing down on him. He thought about his wife, Margaret, who had stood by him through deployments and promotions and the constant stress of military life. He thought about his daughter, Jessica, who was just starting her senior year at Stanford and planning to follow in his footsteps by joining the Navy. Most of all, he thought about the thousands of sailors under his command who looked up to him as a leader and role model. Whatever mistakes he might have made, he couldn't let them down. "Agent Chun," he said quietly, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation. But not here and not now. There are things you need to understand about how the Navy operates, and there are things I need to understand about your investigation." Sarah nodded slowly. "I can arrange for us to meet somewhere more private. Tomorrow evening, perhaps." "Tomorrow's good," Marcus agreed. "But before we go any further, I need to ask you something." "What's that?" Marcus studied her face carefully. "How long have you been working this case?" "Agent Chun?" 3 months, she replied without hesitation. "And in those 3 months, how much have you learned about naval operations and military procurement?" Sarah smiled slightly. "Enough to know when something doesn't add up." Marcus nodded slowly. This young agent was clearly sharper than her appearance suggested. But he also sensed that she was fair, willing to listen to his side of the story before making judgments. That gave him hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way through this mess without destroying everything he'd worked for. "All right, Agent Chun. Tomorrow evening it is. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "No recording devices, no backup agents, no surveillance. Just you and me having an honest conversation. If you can't agree to that, then we'll have to do this the hard way, with lawyers and formal procedures." Sarah considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed. But, Admiral, I need you to understand something too." "What's that?" "If I find evidence of criminal activity, I will pursue it regardless of your rank or service record. My job isn't to protect the Navy's reputation. It's to uphold the law." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Agent Chun. But I hope you'll also keep an open mind about what you might learn." As Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Marcus found himself studying her more carefully. There was definitely more to this woman than met the eye. Her questions had been too precise, her knowledge too detailed for someone who was just conducting a routine review. And there was something about her manner, the way she carried herself, the way she observed everything around her, that reminded him of his own intelligence training. "Agent Chun," he said as she reached the door, "can I ask you one more question?" She turned back. "Of course. What's your background?" "Before the FBI, I mean." For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. Then, the professional mask was back in place. "Military intelligence," she said simply. "Army. 3 tours in Afghanistan before I joined the Bureau." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Military intelligence. That explained a lot about her approach and her knowledge of military operations. It also meant she probably had resources and connections within the Pentagon that could make his life very complicated. "What was your rank when you left the Army?" he asked. Sarah paused with her hand on the door handle. "Major," she said. "I was a major." After she left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room for a long time, staring at the photograph she had left behind. The walls seemed to be closing in around him, and for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure how to fight his way out of the situation. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent his entire adult life serving his country, first as a SEAL crawling through enemy territory, then as an officer making the hard decisions that kept America's sailors safe. And now, at the peak of his career, it might all come crashing down because of a few questionable decisions and a young FBI agent who was clearly much more dangerous than she appeared. He thought about calling his lawyer or reaching out to his contacts at the Pentagon, but something told him that those traditional approaches wouldn't work with Agent Sarah Chun. She had the look of someone who had been in combat, who had learned to trust her instincts and see through deception. If he was going to survive this investigation, he would need to be smarter and more careful than he had ever been before. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor where his sailors were preparing for another day of training and operations. They trusted him to lead them, to make the right decisions, to protect them from threats both foreign and domestic. He couldn't let them down now. Tomorrow's meeting with Agent Chun would be crucial. He needed to find out exactly what she knew and what she suspected. More importantly, he needed to determine whether she was someone he could trust with the truth, all of it, including the parts that could never be made public. As he watched a destroyer cutting through the gray waters of the harbor, Marcus Steele began to plan for what might be the most important mission of his career. The enemy this time wasn't a foreign power or a terrorist organization. It was a brilliant young FBI agent who might hold the power to destroy everything he had built, or who might become an unexpected ally in a fight he was only beginning to understand. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure wasn't an option. But then, again, Marcus Steele had never failed a mission yet, and he wasn't about to start now. Sarah Chun sat in her rental car in the parking lot of the naval base, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she tried to process what had just happened. The meeting with Admiral Steele hadn't gone according to plan. Not that she'd had much of a plan to begin with. She'd expected to find an aging military bureaucrat who would be easy to rattle with a few pointed questions. Instead, she'd encountered someone who was clearly much more formidable than his file suggested. The drive back to her hotel gave her time to think. Steele had been surprised by her knowledge of his classified operations, but he hadn't denied anything or tried to deflect. That suggested either complete innocence or very sophisticated guilt. In her experience, truly innocent people often got flustered and defensive when confronted with evidence. Guilty people who thought they were smarter than the investigators often stayed calm and tried to control the conversation. Admiral Steele had done something else entirely. He had turned the tables and started interviewing her. Sarah pulled into the hotel parking lot and sat for a moment, watching the California sun set over the Pacific. She'd been working this case for 3 months, but she was beginning to realize that she might have underestimated both the complexity of the situation and the man at the center of it. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor, Deputy Director Frank Morrison. Status update. She typed back. Initial contact made. Subject is cooperative, but cautious. Meeting scheduled for tomorrow evening. The response came back immediately. Be careful. Steele has friends in high places. Sarah stared at the message, wondering what Morrison wasn't telling her. This case had come to her desk with minimal background information and a directive to explore quietly. That usually meant someone higher up the food chain was very interested in the outcome, but didn't want their fingerprints on the investigation. She'd learned to be suspicious of cases that came with too little information or too much pressure. Sometimes they were tests of her loyalty or competence. Sometimes they were political weapons disguised as legitimate investigations. And sometimes they were exactly what they appeared to be, routine corruption cases that had the potential to embarrass important people. Back in her hotel room, Sarah spread out copies of all the documents related to Admiral Steele across the desk. Financial records, contract awards, personnel files, surveillance photos, and intercepts of phone conversations. 3 months of meticulous investigation had painted a picture of possible corruption, but something still didn't feel right. She picked up the photograph of Steele and James Morrison outside the restaurant. The body language was wrong for a bribery meeting. Morrison looked eager, almost desperate. Steele looked polite, but distant. If money was changing hands, it wasn't obvious from their interaction. Sarah's laptop chimed with an encrypted message from her contact at the Pentagon, Colonel Lisa Park. They had served together in Afghanistan, and Park now worked in military intelligence oversight. The message was brief. Your subject has some interesting friends. Be very careful who you trust. Another cryptic warning. Sarah was beginning to feel like everyone knew something she didn't. She opened Steele's military personnel file again and studied it more carefully. The man's career was almost too perfect. Rapid promotions, choice assignments, commendations for valor, and leadership. But buried in the details, she found something interesting. Several of his commanding officers over the years had noted his unconventional problem-solving methods and his ability to navigate complex political situations. That suggested Steele was more than just a decorated warrior. He was someone who understood how to work within the system and around it when necessary. It also meant he would be a formidable opponent if this investigation turned adversarial. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her partner, Agent David Kim. "How did it go with the Admiral?" David asked without preamble. "Complicated," Sarah replied. "He's not what I expected." "Good complicated or bad complicated?" Sarah considered the question. "I'm not sure yet. He's definitely hiding something, but I'm starting to wonder if it's what we think it is." David was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I've been doing some digging on the side. There are things about this case that don't add up." "What kind of things?" "The financial analysis that started this whole investigation. It came from an anonymous tip. Someone sent detailed information about Steele's contracts and meeting schedules directly to Deputy Director Morrison." Sarah felt a chill. Anonymous tips were often legitimate, but they could also be weapons used by someone with an agenda. "Did you trace the source?" "Dead end. Whoever sent it knew how to cover their tracks." "But, Sarah, there's something else. James Morrison, the CEO of Titan Maritime? He's got a clean record, but his company appeared out of nowhere 3 years ago with major Navy contracts. Before that, there's almost no paper trail." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we're looking at this backwards. Maybe Admiral Steele isn't the one taking bribes. Maybe he's the target of someone else's operation." Sarah sat down on the hotel room bed, her mind racing. If David was right, then tomorrow night's meeting with Steele could be a trap, but not the kind she'd been expecting. "David, I need you to keep digging. But be careful who you talk to about this." "Already on it. But, Sarah, if this is bigger than we thought, you might want to consider backing out of tomorrow's meeting." "Can't do that," Sarah said firmly. "If Steele is innocent, he deserves to know what's happening to him. And if he's guilty, this might be my only chance to get him to confess." After hanging up, Sarah tried to eat dinner, but her stomach was too knotted with anxiety to manage more than a few bites. She kept thinking about Admiral Steele's eyes, the way he'd looked at her when she'd mentioned her military background. There had been recognition there, and something else. Respect, maybe, or calculation. She told him she'd been a major in Army intelligence, which was true but incomplete. What she hadn't mentioned was the nature of her work in Afghanistan, or the reason she'd left the military to join the FBI. 3 years ago, Major Sarah Chun had been investigating corruption within the Army supply chain in Kandahar province. She'd uncovered evidence that someone was selling information about convoy routes to insurgents, resulting in several ambushes and the deaths of American soldiers. The investigation had led her to a respected colonel who had been taking payments from local contractors in exchange for operational intelligence. But when she tried to present her evidence, she'd found herself blocked at every turn. The colonel had powerful friends who were willing to protect him, and Sarah's career had suddenly become expendable. The choice had been clear: accept a transfer to a meaningless desk job and forget what she'd learned, or leave the military and find another way to serve her country. She'd chosen the FBI, where she'd hoped the civilian oversight would make it harder for corruption to flourish. But now, 3 years later, she was beginning to wonder if she'd been naive about the reach of powerful people who were willing to protect their own interests at any cost. The next evening, Sarah arrived at the small seafood restaurant on Harbor Island 30 minutes early. Admiral Steele had suggested the location, a quiet place with outdoor seating that would make surveillance difficult. She chose a table on the deck, overlooking the bay, and settled in to wait. Steele arrived exactly on time, wearing civilian clothes that somehow still made him look like a military officer. He moved through the restaurant with the kind of situational awareness that never quite went away, even years after leaving combat zones. "Agent Chun," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting me. Thank you for being willing to talk, Admiral." They ordered dinner and made small talk about the weather and the view until the server left them alone. Then Steele leaned forward and met her eyes directly. "Before we start," he said quietly, "I need to know something. Are you here as Agent Chun, the FBI investigator, or Major Chun, the former intelligence officer? Sarah felt her breath catch. I'm not sure I understand the distinction. Yes, you do, Steele said calmly. The FBI investigator is here to build a case and make arrests. The intelligence officer is here to gather information and understand the bigger picture. And Titan Maritime Solutions is a front company created by Naval Intelligence. James Morrison is actually Commander James Morrison, Naval Intelligence. The contracts you've been investigating aren't corruption. They're cover for classified operations. The revelation hits Sarah like a physical blow. If Steele was telling the truth, then her entire investigation was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Why wasn't I briefed on this? Because Operation Seahawk has been compromised, Steele said grimly. Someone inside the intelligence community is feeding information to foreign agents. The anonymous tip that started your investigation, it came from someone who wanted to expose the operation and destroy the people involved in it. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. So, the FBI is being used as a weapon against a legitimate Navy operation? That's what I believe, yes. And, Agent Chun, I think you're in danger. The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine. What kind of danger? The kind that comes from getting too close to something that powerful people want to keep hidden. 3 months ago, a Navy intelligence analyst named Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Torres was found dead in her apartment. Officially, it was suicide. Unofficially, she was working on identifying the source of the leaks in Operation Seahawk. Sarah felt sick. And you think her death is connected to my investigation? I think your investigation was designed to be a distraction. While you've been focused on me and Titan Maritime, the real enemy has been covering their tracks and eliminating witnesses. The server returned to refill their water glasses, forcing a pause in the conversation. Sarah used the time to process what she'd heard. If Steele was telling the truth, then she'd been played from the beginning. But if he was lying, this was an incredibly sophisticated attempt to deflect blame and muddy the waters. Admiral, she said finally, assuming you're telling me the truth, what do you want from me? Help, Steele said simply. Your investigation has actually uncovered some valuable information, but you've been looking at it from the wrong angle. The financial patterns you identified, they're not evidence of corruption. They're evidence of how the enemy has been tracking and targeting our operations. What kind of help do you need? I need someone inside the FBI who can be trusted. Someone who can help me identify who's been feeding information to your supervisors and manipulating your investigation. Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. It was the same feeling she'd had in Afghanistan when she'd realized that her own command structure might be compromised. Admiral, if what you're telling me is true, then I'm not safe either. Whoever is behind this won't hesitate to eliminate an FBI agent who gets too close to the truth. No, Steele agreed, they won't, which is why we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Sarah stared out at the darkening bay, watching the lights of naval vessels moving through the water. Her entire worldview was shifting, and she wasn't sure who or what to believe anymore. But her instincts, honed by years of intelligence work, were telling her that Admiral Steele was telling the truth, at least about the immediate danger. Assuming I agree to help, she said slowly, what would that look like? First, you continue your official investigation as if nothing has changed. But you report your real findings to me, not to your supervisors. Second, we work together to identify who's been manipulating the FBI's investigation and why. And third, Steele's expression grew grim. We figure out who killed Lieutenant Commander Torres and make sure they don't kill anyone else. Sarah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. She was being asked to go against her chain of command, to trust a man she'd met less than 24 hours ago, and to put her life at risk for an operation she couldn't verify. Every piece of her training told her to walk away and report this conversation to her supervisors. But another part of her, the part that had become an intelligence officer because she believed in protecting innocent people, was telling her that Admiral Steele was her best chance of getting to the truth. Admiral, she said finally, if I agree to this, I need something from you. Name it. Complete honesty. No more classified operations I don't know about. No more surprises. No more half-truths. If we're going to work together, I need to know everything. Steele nodded slowly. Agreed. But, Agent Chun, there's something else you need to understand. What's that? Once you know everything, there's no going back. The information I'm going to share with you will make you a target, just like Lieutenant Commander Torres. Are you prepared for that? Sarah thought about her comfortable life as an FBI agent, her small apartment in San Diego, her plans for the future. All of that would be at risk if she agreed to help Steele. But she also thought about the dead Navy intelligence analyst and the possibility that corruption reached into the highest levels of both the military and federal law enforcement. Admiral, she said, meeting his eyes directly, I didn't join the FBI to play it safe. If there are people out there who think they can manipulate investigations and kill witnesses to protect their secrets, then they need to learn they're wrong. Steele smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Major Chun, I think this might be the beginning of a very interesting partnership. As they left the restaurant and walked to their cars, Sarah felt both afraid and exhilarated. She was about to embark on the most dangerous investigation of her career, working with a man who might be either a master criminal or a true American hero. Either way, she was committed now. The game was about to change, and Sarah Chun was ready to play for keeps. Tomorrow, she would begin the delicate process of investigating her own investigation, looking for signs that her supervisors and colleagues might not be who they appear to be. It would require all of her intelligence training and more courage than she'd ever needed before. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt like she was finally on the right track to uncovering the truth. Whatever that truth turned out to be, she was determined to see it through to the end. The stakes were higher than she'd imagined, and the enemy was closer than she'd feared. But Admiral Marcus Steele had given her something she hadn't had before: hope that justice was still possible, even in a world where powerful people thought they were above the law. Now all she had to do was survive long enough to prove it. The morning after her dinner with Admiral Steele, Sarah Chun sat in her hotel room, staring at her laptop screen. Everything felt different now. The case files, the evidence, even her own reflection in the mirror. She'd spent the night going through every document in her investigation with fresh eyes, looking for signs of manipulation and misdirection. What she'd found had shaken her to the core. The financial analysis that had triggered the investigation was too perfect. Every anomaly highlighted, every suspicious transaction flagged, every connection to Admiral Steele clearly documented. Real financial crimes investigations were messy, full of false leads and dead ends. This one read like someone had created a roadmap designed to lead her to specific conclusions. More disturbing were the gaps she was now noticing. Key documents were missing from the contractor files. Witness interviews had been conducted by other agents and summarized rather than recorded. And the timeline of events had been presented in a way that made Steele look guilty while ignoring alternative explanations. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her analysis. The caller ID showed Deputy Director Morrison. Chun, she answered, keeping her voice professionally neutral. Sarah, I want to check on your progress with the Steele investigation. How did yesterday's interview go? Productive, sir. Admiral Steele was cooperative and provided some useful background on naval procurement procedures. Good. I'm hoping we can wrap this up quickly. There's pressure from Washington to either file charges or close the case. Pressure from Washington. Sarah made a mental note to ask Steele what he knew about political connections to the case. Sir, I'd like to request a few more days to pursue some additional leads. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What kind of leads? I want to interview some of the other officers involved in the contracting decisions. Get a broader picture of how the process works. That's not necessary, Sarah. We have enough evidence to proceed. I want you to prepare a summary report recommending prosecution. The directive felt like a slap in the face. Sarah had never been ordered to reach a specific conclusion in an investigation before. Sir, with respect, I don't think we have enough evidence for a strong case. There are still some inconsistencies I'd like to resolve. Another pause, longer this time. Agent Chun, are you questioning my judgment? No, sir. I'm just trying to be thorough. Being thorough is admirable, Sarah, but so is knowing when an investigation has run its course. I'll expect your report by Friday. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone. In her experience, supervisors who were eager to rush investigations usually had reasons that had nothing to do with justice. She opened her secure email and sent a message to her partner, David Kim. Need to meet. Urgent, not the office. 30 minutes later, they met at a coffee shop in downtown San Diego. David looked as troubled as she felt. I've been doing more digging on our anonymous tipster, he said without preamble. The information came through a series of encrypted relays, but I managed to trace it back to a VPN server in Maryland. That's where the Pentagon is, Sarah observed. It gets better. The payment for the VPN service was made using a credit card registered to a shell company. That shell company receives funding from a private intelligence contractor called Meridian Analytics. Sarah felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. Who owns Meridian Analytics? That's where it gets interesting. The company is owned by a former Navy admiral named Richard Hawthorne. He retired 2 years ago after some kind of scandal, but the details are classified. The name Hawthorne rang a bell for Sarah, but she couldn't place it immediately. What kind of scandal? I couldn't find specifics, but for what I could piece together, he was involved in some kind of disagreement with current Navy leadership about intelligence operations. He left the service abruptly and immediately started his consulting company. Sarah remembered where she'd heard the name. Admiral Steele had mentioned that Operation Seahawk had been compromised by someone inside the intelligence community. If Hawthorne had been involved in naval intelligence and left under suspicious circumstances, he could be the source of the leaks. David, I need you to do something for me, but it has to stay between us. Her partner leaned forward, his expression serious. What do you need? I need you to find out everything you can about Admiral Richard Hawthorne and his connection to current Navy operations. But don't use official FBI resources. This has to be completely off the books. David studied her face. Sarah, what's going on? You're acting like you don't trust our own people. Sarah made a decision that could change everything. David, I think someone is using our investigation to target innocent people. I can't prove it yet, but I need your help to find out who and why. Are you talking about Admiral Steele? I'm talking about something much bigger than Admiral Steele. But I can't give you details until I know more. Can you trust me on this? David was quiet for a long moment. They've been partners for 2 years, and he learned to trust her instincts. What do you need me to do? Keep working the case officially, but feed me everything you find. And, David, be careful who you talk to about this. I'm starting to think we might not be the only ones investigating Admiral Steele. After leaving the coffee shop, Sarah drove to Balboa Park and found a quiet bench where she could make a secure phone call to Admiral Steele. He answered on the first ring. Agent Chun, I was hoping you'd call. Admiral, we need to meet. I'll learn some things that I think you'll find interesting. Can you talk over the phone? Not safely. Too many people might be listening. There was a pause. There's a bookstore in La Jolla called Warwick's. Meet me there at 2 p.m. Come alone, and make sure you're not followed. The drive to La Jolla gave Sarah time to think about what she was doing. By agreeing to work with Admiral Steele, she was potentially compromising her oath as an FBI agent. But if her suspicions were correct, her investigation was being manipulated by people who were using the Bureau as a weapon against innocent Americans. She joined the FBI to serve justice, not to be a tool for someone else's agenda. Warwick's was a large, multi-level bookstore with numerous alcoves and reading areas. Sarah found Admiral Steele in the military history section, apparently browsing a book about World War II naval operations. Interesting reading? She asked quietly. Always, Steele replied, not looking up from the book. There are lessons in these old stories that apply to modern situations. Like how sometimes the greatest threats come from people you thought you could trust. They moved to a secluded corner of the store where they could talk quietly without being overheard. What did you learn? Steele asked. Sarah told him about her conversation with Morrison, David's research on Meridian Analytics, and the connection to Admiral Hawthorne. As she spoke, Steele's expression grew increasingly grim. Richard Hawthorne, he said finally, I should have known. You know him. We served together early in our careers. He was brilliant, ambitious, and completely ruthless. 2 years ago, he tried to convince Navy leadership to abandon Operation Seahawk and pursue a different approach to counterintelligence. What kind of approach? The kind that involved making deals with foreign intelligence services and selling out American operations for political advantage. When he was turned down, he started leaking information to discredit the people who had opposed him. Sarah felt a chill. So he's the one who's been compromising Operation Seahawk. I believe so. And now he's using your investigation to finish the job. If he can destroy me and the other officers involved in Seahawk, he can claim that his approach was the right one all along. But why kill Lieutenant Commander Torres? Steele's expression darkened, because she figured out what he was doing and was about to expose him. Hawthorne has resources and connections that go far beyond what most people realize. He can arrange for someone to have an accident or a suicide without leaving any traceable evidence. Sarah thought about Deputy Director Morrison's pressure to rush the investigation and filed charges against Steele. Admiral, how high up do you think this conspiracy goes? I don't know, Steele admitted. But I've learned not to underestimate the reach of people like Hawthorne. He's had 2 years to build relationships and plan allies throughout the government, including the FBI. Possibly. Your deputy director seems very eager to see me arrested. That could be legitimate law enforcement, or it could be something else. Sarah felt sick. The idea that her own supervisors might be compromised was almost too much to bear. What do we do now? Now we gather evidence and figure out who we can trust. But, Agent Shun, I need you to understand something. If we're right about this, then everyone involved is in mortal danger. Hawthorne has already killed once to protect his secret. He won't hesitate to kill again. I understand, Sarah said, though she wasn't sure she really did. Admiral, there's something I need to ask you. Go ahead. How do I know you're telling me the truth? How do I know this isn't just an elaborate story to throw me off your trail? Steele smiled slightly. You don't. But, Agent Shun, you're an experienced intelligence officer. Trust your instincts. Do I seem like someone who's been taking bribes from defense contractors? Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception. What she saw was a man who carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced genuine danger and made life-or-death decisions under pressure. More importantly, his story explained all the inconsistencies in her investigation better than the corruption theory did. No, she said finally. You don't. Then, we work together to expose the truth. But we have to be smart about it. Hawthorne has had 2 years to prepare for this moment. He'll have contingency plans and escape routes planned out. What's our first step? We need proof that Meridian Analytics was behind the anonymous tip that started your investigation. And we need to find out who else in the government is working with Hawthorne. I can have my partner trace the financial connections more thoroughly. Can you trust your partner? Sarah thought about David's willingness to help her investigate off the books. Yes, but, Admiral, if we're going to do this, I need something more from you. What's that? I need to see proof that Operation Seahawk is real. I need to meet Commander Morrison and verify his identity. I need to see classified documents that support your story. Steele nodded slowly. That could be arranged. But once I show you those things, you'll officially know classified information. There won't be any going back to your normal FBI career. Sarah thought about Lieutenant Commander Torres, found dead in her apartment. She thought about the possibility that her own investigation was being used as a weapon against innocent people. And she thought about her oath to uphold justice and protect the American people. Admiral, she said, my career stopped being normal the moment someone decided to use me as a pawn in their game. Show me what you have. Steele checked his watch. Tonight, there's a secure location where we can meet Commander Morrison and review the classified materials. But, Agent Shun, I need to warn you about something. What? Once Hawthorne realizes that you're working with me instead of against me, you'll become a target. He can't afford to let either of us expose what he's been doing. Sarah felt a familiar surge of determination. It was the same feeling she'd had in Afghanistan when she decided to pursue corruption even though it might end her military career. Admiral, I've been a target before. The difference is, this time I know who my enemy is. Good, Steele said, because we're going to need that kind of courage for what comes next. As they left the bookstore separately, Sarah felt the weight of the decision she'd made. She was now officially involved in a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of both military and civilian government. Her life was probably in danger, her career was definitely at risk, and she wasn't even sure who she could trust besides Admiral Steele and her partner David. But for the first time since starting this investigation, she felt like she was fighting on the right side. Whatever Admiral Hawthorne was planning, whatever corruption he represented, she was going to stop him. The memory of Lieutenant Commander Torres demanded nothing less. That evening, as Sarah prepared to meet Steele and learn the full truth about Operation Seahawk, she made one more secure phone call to David. I need you to do something for me, she said when he answered. I need you to create a complete backup of our investigation files and store it somewhere safe. Somewhere that no one else can access it. Sarah, you're scaring me. What's going on? I'm going to learn the truth tonight. But just in case something happens to me, I need to know that someone will be able to carry on the investigation. Nothing's going to happen to you, David said firmly. I won't let it. Sarah smiled, even though he couldn't see her. Thanks, partner. But, David, if something does happen, promise me you'll find Admiral Hawthorne and make sure he pays for what he's done. I promise, David said. But, Sarah, promise me you'll be careful. I will, Sarah lied, knowing that careful was no longer an option. The stakes were too high and the enemy too dangerous for anything but total commitment. As she drove toward her meeting with Steele and Commander Morrison, Sarah Chun prepared herself for the most dangerous night of her life. By morning, she would either have the evidence she needed to bring down a traitor, or she would be dead. There was no middle ground left. The abandoned warehouse in the industrial district of San Diego looked like countless others. Rusted metal siding, broken windows, and weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. But as Sarah Chun approached the designated entrance, she noticed subtle signs that this wasn't just another derelict building. The security cameras were too new, the locks too sophisticated, and the lone security guard too alert for a supposedly empty facility. Admiral Steele met her at a side door, wearing dark clothing and carrying himself with the heightened awareness of someone expecting trouble. Agent Chun, he said quietly, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for trusting me," Sarah replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a line from which there would be no return. Steele led her through a maze of corridors and security checkpoints, each more sophisticated than the last. Biometric scanners, armed guards, and surveillance equipment that belonged in a Pentagon facility, not an abandoned warehouse. Whatever Operation Seahawk was, it was clearly much larger and more important than Steele had initially implied. They finally arrived at a conference room where a man in his early 40s was waiting. He was tall and lean, with the bearing of a career military officer, but there was something in his eyes that reminded Sarah of her own intelligence training, the careful watchfulness of someone who had learned to spot deception and danger. "Agent Chun," Steele said, "I'd like you to meet Commander James Morrison, Naval Intelligence." Morrison stood and extended his hand. "Agent Chun, Admiral Steele tells me you're willing to help us expose a significant threat to national security." Sarah shook his hand, studying his face. "Commander Morrison, I need to see proof that you are who Admiral Steele says you are, and that Operation Seahawk is legitimate." Morrison smiled slightly. "I'd be concerned if you didn't ask for proof." "Agent Chun, may I see your FBI credentials?" Sarah handed over her badge and ID, which Morrison examined carefully before returning them. He then produced his own military identification and a letter of authorization signed by the Secretary of the Navy. These documents authorize Operation Seahawk and designate Titan Maritime Solutions as a cover identity for our activities, Morrison explained. "Everything Admiral Steele has told you is accurate." Sarah examined the documents, which appeared genuine. More importantly, Morrison's manner and knowledge seemed consistent with what she'd expect from a naval intelligence officer. "Commander, can you tell me about Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Torres?" Morrison's expression darkened. "Rebecca was our analyst assigned to identify the source of intelligence leaks within Operation Seahawk. 3 weeks before her death, she told me she'd identified the person responsible and was preparing a report. She was found dead in her apartment 2 days before she was scheduled to present her findings. And you believe Admiral Hawthorne was behind her death?" "I believe someone with significant resources and intelligence connections arranged for Rebecca to be silenced. Admiral Hawthorne fits that profile perfectly." Steele gestured toward a wall-mounted screen. "Agent Chun, let me show you what we've discovered about Hawthorne's activities." The screen displayed a complex web of financial transactions, communications intercepts, and surveillance photos. At the center was Admiral Richard Hawthorne, but the web extended to include defense contractors, foreign intelligence agents, and what appeared to be several government officials. "Hawthorne has been selling information about U.S. naval operations to Chinese intelligence for at least 2 years, Steele explained. The money was laundered through his consulting company and a network of shell corporations. Sarah studied the evidence, her trained eye looking for inconsistencies or fabrication. What she saw was meticulous documentation that would have taken months to compile. This is impressive work. But why hasn't this been turned over to the FBI or other law enforcement agencies? Morrison and Steele exchanged glances. "Because we don't know how far the corruption extends," Morrison said. "Hawthorne has had 2 years to build relationships and compromise people throughout the government. We couldn't risk having our evidence disappear or our investigation shut down by someone working with him." "Which brings us to your investigation," Steele added. "Agent Chun, Hawthorne used your FBI investigation as both a distraction and a weapon. While you were focused on me and Titan Maritime, he was covering his tracks and eliminating witnesses. And if he had succeeded in having me arrested, it would have destroyed Operation Seahawk and eliminated one of his primary threats. Sarah felt sick as she realized how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. So, my investigation was never about corruption. It was about destroying the people who were trying to stop a traitor. That's correct, Steele confirmed. But, Agent Chun, your investigation has actually been very valuable to us. You've uncovered financial patterns and communication links that we hadn't identified. The difference is that you've been interpreting them as evidence of my guilt, when they're actually evidence of Hawthorne's activities. Morrison pulled up another screen showing communication intercepts. These are encrypted messages between Hawthorne and his Chinese contacts. They discuss using federal resources to eliminate threats to ongoing operations. We believe that refers to using your FBI investigation to target Admiral Steele and other officers involved in Operation Seahawk. Sarah stared at the evidence, feeling a mixture of rage and determination. She'd been used as a weapon against innocent people who were trying to protect their country. The violation felt both professional and personal. What do you need from me? We need you to continue your official investigation as if nothing has changed, Steele explained. But instead of building a case against me, we need you to gather evidence against Hawthorne and his co-conspirators within the FBI. You think my supervisors are working with Hawthorne? We think it's possible, Morrison said. Your deputy director's eagerness to rush the investigation and file charges suggests either incompetence or corruption. We need to find out which. Sarah thought about her conversation with Morrison and his pressure to wrap up the case quickly. How do we do that without exposing what we know? Steele pulled out a secure phone and handed it to her. This will allow us to communicate safely. You'll continue reporting to your supervisors, but you'll also report to us. If your deputy director is working with Hawthorne, he'll reveal himself by trying to shut down or redirect your investigation. And if he's not, then we'll have gained a valuable ally within the FBI, Morrison said. But, Agent Chun, you need to understand the risks. If Hawthorne realizes that you're working with us instead of against us, you'll become a target just like Lieutenant Commander Torres. Sarah took the secure phone, feeling its weight in her hand. Such a small device, but it represented a commitment that could cost her everything. Commander, Admiral, I have one more question. What's that? Steele asked. Why should I trust you? You just show me classified information and ask me to spy on my own colleagues. How do I know this isn't an elaborate setup to compromise me? Steele was quiet for a moment, apparently considering his answer carefully. Agent Chun, you don't know. And, frankly, if you weren't suspicious of our motives, I'd be concerned about your judgment. But, let me ask you something. Does what you've learned tonight explain the inconsistencies in your investigation better than the corruption theory you started with? Sarah had to admit that it did. The evidence of Hawthorne's activities, the sophistication of Operation Seahawk, and the timing of Lieutenant Commander Torres' death all pointed to a conspiracy far more complex than simple bribery and kickbacks. Yes, she said finally. It does. Then, trust your instincts, Steele said. You're an experienced intelligence officer. You know how to evaluate evidence and assess credibility. What do your instincts tell you about what you've seen tonight? Sarah's instincts were telling her that she'd stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than she'd imagined. They were also telling her that Admiral Steele and Commander Morrison were the good guys in this situation, and that Admiral Hawthorne represented a genuine threat to national security. They tell me that I need to help you stop Admiral Hawthorne, she said. Morrison smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Then, let's discuss how we're going to do that. For the next 2 hours, they developed a plan that would allow Sarah to continue her FBI investigation while secretly gathering evidence against Hawthorne and his co-conspirators. She would use her official position to access financial records and communication intercepts that Operation Seahawk couldn't obtain through military channels. In return, Steele and Morrison would provide her with intelligence that would help her identify which of her colleagues could be trusted. The plan was risky for everyone involved. Sarah would be violating FBI protocols and potentially breaking federal laws. Steele and Morrison would be sharing classified information with a civilian agent. And all of them would be making themselves targets for a traitor who had already demonstrated his willingness to commit murder. But they all agreed that the alternative, allowing Hawthorne to continue selling American secrets and destroying the people who opposed him, was unacceptable. As the meeting concluded, Morrison handed Sarah an encrypted hard drive. These are copies of all the evidence we've compiled on Hawthorne's activities. Keep it somewhere safe and only access it using a secure computer. If something happens to us, that drive contains everything you'll need to continue the investigation. Sarah accepted the drive, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. What about Lieutenant Commander Torres's murder? Do we have enough evidence to prove Hawthorne was responsible? Steele's expression grew grim. Not yet. But, Agent Shun, that's part of what we need your help with. Torres was investigating financial connections between Hawthorne and his foreign contacts when she died. If we can access her case files through official FBI channels, we might be able to complete her work. I'll see what I can do, Sarah promised. As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Morrison pulled Sarah aside. Agent Shun, there's something else you need to know. Admiral Steele didn't tell you everything about why Hawthorne left the Navy. What do you mean? Hawthorne was involved in an operation that went wrong in Syria. 3 American operatives died because someone leaked their location to enemy forces. Steele was leading the rescue mission that tried to save them. Sarah felt a chill. Are you saying Hawthorne was already selling information 2 years ago? We think so. And we think that's when Steele first started suspecting him. This isn't just about stopping a current threat, Agent Shun. It's about getting justice for people who have already died because of Hawthorne's betrayal. The revelation added another layer of personal motivation for Sarah. She wasn't just protecting current operations. She was seeking justice for fallen Americans who had been betrayed by someone they trusted. Commander, she said, I promise you that Admiral Hawthorne will be held accountable for what he's done. I believe you, Morrison replied. But be careful, Agent Shun. Hawthorne is desperate now. And desperate people do desperate things. Don't give him any reason to think you're a threat until we're ready to take him down. As Sarah drove back to her hotel, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had fundamentally changed. 3 days ago, she'd been a federal agent investigating what seemed like routine corruption. Now she was part of a conspiracy to expose a traitor who had infiltrated the highest levels of American intelligence. The secure phone in her pocket felt like a bomb waiting to explode. Every call she made, every report she filed, every conversation with her colleagues would now be part of an elaborate deception designed to uncover the truth. But for the first time since starting this investigation, Sarah felt like she was on the right side of justice. Admiral Hawthorne had betrayed his oath, sold out his country, and murdered an innocent woman to cover his tracks. He thought he was untouchable because of his connections and his careful planning. He was about to learn that he was wrong. Sarah Chun had never failed to solve a case, and she wasn't about to start with the most important investigation of her career. Admiral Hawthorne had made 2 crucial mistakes. He had underestimated Admiral Steele, and he had chosen the wrong FBI agent to manipulate. Now, he was going to pay for both errors. The next morning, Sarah would begin the most dangerous phase of her career, pretending to investigate Admiral Steele while actually hunting the man who had been pulling her strings from the beginning. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the margin for error was non-existent. But Sarah had never felt more determined to see justice done. Admiral Hawthorne's reign of betrayal was about to come to an end, whether he realized it or not. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah Chan's clandestine meeting with Admiral Steele and Commander Morrison, and the dangerous game of deception was taking its toll. Every morning, she reported to FBI headquarters and pretended to build a case against Admiral Steele while secretly gathering evidence against Admiral Hawthorne. Every evening, she met with her new allies to share intelligence and plan their next moves. The strain was beginning to show. David Kim had noticed her unusual behavior and late-night absences, though he hadn't questioned her directly. Deputy Director Morrison continued to pressure her for a quick resolution to the Steele investigation, becoming increasingly agitated when she requested more time for thorough documentation. But the evidence against Admiral Hawthorne was mounting steadily. Using her FBI access, Sarah had uncovered a network of shell companies and offshore accounts that traced back to Meridian Analytics. More damning were the communication intercepts showing contact between Hawthorne and known Chinese intelligence operatives. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening when Sarah's secure phone buzzed with an urgent message from Commander Morrison. Emergency meeting. Warehouse. Come alone. Sarah arrived at the warehouse to find both Steele and Morrison waiting with expressions of grim excitement. Something significant had happened. Agent Shun, Steele said without preamble, we've found the smoking gun. Morrison activated the wall screen, which displayed a series of intercepted communications. 3 hours ago, our surveillance picked up a conversation between Admiral Hawthorne and his Chinese contact. They're planning to eliminate both Admiral Steele and you within the next 48 hours. Sarah felt her blood run cold. What kind of elimination? The same kind that happened to Lieutenant Commander Torres, Steele replied grimly. But, Agent Chun, there's more. Hawthorne mentioned that he has assets in place within the FBI to help clean up any loose ends. He's talking about my supervisors? We think so, Morrison confirmed. The conversation specifically mentioned using federal resources to discredit you if the assassination attempt fails. They plan to claim you went rogue and was working with foreign agents. Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. Not only was her life in immediate danger, but her reputation and career were being set up for destruction as well. What do we do? Steele leaned forward, his expression intense. We end this tonight. We have enough evidence to expose Hawthorne's entire network, but we need to move before he can execute his plan against us. What kind of move? Morrison pulled up another screen showing surveillance photos of a luxury hotel in downtown San Diego. Tomorrow night, Hawthorne is meeting with a Chinese contact at the Grand Pacific Hotel. They're planning to transfer classified information about submarine technology in exchange for payment. We're going to be there, Steele added, with cameras, recording equipment, and enough evidence to put Hawthorne away for treason. Sarah studied the photos, her mind racing through the tactical challenges. Admiral, this is incredibly dangerous. If Hawthorne suspects we're onto him, he could disappear completely. And if his FBI contacts realize what we're doing, they could shut down our operation before we get the evidence we need. That's why we need to be smart about how we handle this, Steele agreed. Agent Chun, we need you to file a report with your supervisors tomorrow morning. Tell them you've uncovered evidence that Admiral Steele is planning to meet with foreign agents tomorrow night at the Grand Pacific Hotel. Sarah's eyes widened as she understood the plan. You want me to send the FBI to the hotel to arrest you, but we'll actually be capturing Hawthorne. Exactly. If your supervisors are clean, they'll respond appropriately to your report, and we'll have legitimate FBI backup for the operation. If they're compromised, they'll try to sabotage the operation or warn Hawthorne, which will expose them. Morrison added, either way, we'll have multiple federal agents as witnesses when we arrest a traitor in the act of selling classified information to enemy agents. The plan was brilliant, but incredibly risky. If anything went wrong, Sarah could find herself arrested alongside Admiral Hawthorne, her career destroyed, and her life in ruins. But if they succeeded, they would expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of both military and civilian government. What about Commander Morrison? Sarah asked. If this is a Navy intelligence operation, shouldn't military authorities be handling the arrest? They will be, Steele replied. But we need FBI involvement to ensure that Hawthorne can't use his military connections to escape prosecution. This has to be a joint operation with clear civilian oversight. Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what might be the most important decision of her career. Admiral, Commander, if we're going to do this, I need complete transparency. No more surprises, no more classified information I don't know about. Are we all clear on exactly what we're planning? Completely clear, Steele confirmed. Tomorrow morning, you file your report identifying the Grand Pacific Hotel as a location where Admiral Steele will be meeting with foreign agents. Tomorrow evening, we'll all be there to arrest the real traitor. And after Hawthorne is arrested? Morrison smiled grimly. After Hawthorne is arrested, we'll have access to his financial records, communication logs, and contact networks. We'll be able to identify every person who's been working with him, including any compromised FBI personnel. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Then let's do this. The next morning, Sarah walked into Deputy Director Morrison's office with a formal report that would set their plan in motion. Her hands were steady, but her heart was racing as she prepared to take the biggest gamble of her career. Sir, she said, placing the folder on his desk, I have significant new evidence in the Admiral Steele investigation. Morrison looked up from his computer with obvious irritation. Agent Chun, I thought I made it clear that I wanted this case wrapped up quickly. Yes, sir, but this changes everything. I have credible intelligence that Admiral Steele is planning to meet with foreign agents tonight at the Grand Pacific Hotel. This could be our chance to catch him in the act of treason. Morrison's expression shifted from irritation to intense interest. He opened the folder and scanned the fabricated evidence that Sarah and Steele had carefully prepared. This is significant. How did you obtain this information? Surveillance and financial analysis, sir. Everything is documented in the report. Morrison was quiet for several minutes as he reviewed the documents. Sarah watched his face carefully, looking for any sign that he was compromised or planning to warn Hawthorne. What she saw was genuine concentration and what appeared to be legitimate concern. Agent Chun, Morrison said finally, if this intelligence is accurate, we need to move quickly. I'm going to authorize a full surveillance team for tonight's operation. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Morrison's response seemed appropriate for a clean FBI supervisor, but she wouldn't know for certain until the operation was complete. Sir, I recommend we coordinate with naval intelligence since this involves military personnel and classified information. Agreed. I'll make the necessary calls. Morrison picked up his phone, then paused. Agent Chun, excellent work on this case. Your persistence has paid off. As Sarah left Morrison's office, she activated the secure phone and sent a coded message to Admiral Steele. Green light. Package will be delivered as scheduled. The response came back immediately. Understood. All players in position. The rest of the day passed slowly as Sarah tried to maintain her normal routine while preparing mentally for the evening's operation. At 5 p.m., she left FBI headquarters and drove to a predetermined location where Admiral Steele was waiting. How did your supervisor react? Steele asked as she got into his vehicle. Like a legitimate FBI supervisor should, Sarah replied. He authorized a full surveillance team and agreed to coordinate with naval intelligence. Either he's clean or he's a very good actor. We'll know soon enough, Steele said grimly. Commander Morrison is already in position at the hotel with recording equipment. Our Chinese friends arrived an hour ago and are set up in the penthouse suite. And Admiral Hawthorne should be arriving any minute. Agent Chun, are you ready for this? Sarah checked her service weapon and adjusted her concealed recording device. Admiral, 3 weeks ago, I thought I was investigating simple corruption. Tonight, I'm about to arrest a traitor who's been selling our secrets to enemy agents. I'm as ready as anyone can be for something like this. Steele smiled for the first time in days. Agent Chun, it's been an honor working with you. They drove to the Grand Pacific Hotel in separate vehicles, maintaining radio contact through encrypted channels. The FBI surveillance team was already in position, along with naval intelligence operatives and local police backup. Everything was set for the most important operation of Sarah's career. At 8:47 p.m., Admiral Richard Hawthorne entered the hotel lobby. At 8:53 p.m., he took the elevator to the penthouse suite where his Chinese contact was waiting. At 9:15 p.m., surveillance confirmed that classified documents were being exchanged for payment. At 9:18 p.m., Sarah Chun gave the signal that would bring Admiral Hawthorne's treasonous career to an end. All units move in. The arrest was swift and decisive. FBI agents and naval intelligence operatives stormed the penthouse suite simultaneously, catching Hawthorne and his Chinese contact in the act of exchanging classified submarine technology for a briefcase full of money. Hawthorne's face went white when he saw Sarah enter the room behind Admiral Steele. You, he said with obvious shock. But you're supposed to be investigating him. I was, Sarah replied calmly. But then I learned the truth about who the real traitor was. As Hawthorne was handcuffed and read his rights, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, and the man who had betrayed his country and murdered Lieutenant Commander Torres was finally going to pay for his crimes. But the night wasn't over yet. As Hawthorne was being led away, he looked back at Sarah with a mixture of rage and desperation. You have no idea what you've done, he said. This goes so much higher than you think. They'll destroy you for this. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Admiral Hawthorne, the only person being destroyed tonight is you. In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Hawthorne's network uncovered a web of corruption that reached into multiple government agencies. 3 FBI supervisors, 2 Pentagon officials, and a dozen defense contractors were arrested on charges ranging from bribery to treason. Deputy Director Morrison, to Sarah's relief, proved to be completely clean. His pressure to rush the investigation had been legitimate concern about FBI resources, not an attempt to protect Hawthorne. He personally commended Sarah for her work and recommended her for promotion. Admiral Steele was cleared of all charges and returned to his command with his reputation intact. Operation Seahawk continued its mission of protecting American